Hey guys, it's Troy here with another quick little session for fiduciary training. Today we're going to talk about your investments and your fiduciary responsibility related to managing those investments and specifically the investment policy statement. This will be said again, but let me just state right up front, your investment policy statement is not a requirement under ERISA. The DOL doesn't require that you have an investment policy statement. Ironically, if your company is going through an audit, the auditors from the DOL will often ask for a copy of the investment policy statement, even though it's not required. So it is really important if we have an investment policy statement that we're following the investment policy statement, but it's not required that we have one. Fiduciaries have the duty under the DOL regulations to review plan investments for what? And we should check all of these that apply. Is it the risk of loss, portfolio diversification, making sure that the portfolios meet the objectives of the plan, which would typically be spelled out in the investment policy statement or the IPS, maximizing investment returns, or assuring that the plan has index funds in the portfolio. Well, under the DOL regulations, what is required is that as a fiduciary, the duty for monitoring investments should include monitoring for the risk of loss and making sure that it's properly diversified. Also, making sure that the portfolio meets the objectives of the plan. Now, these are the criteria required under ERISA 404A. The others can be best practices, but are not strictly part of the requirements. Obviously, you want to maximize investment returns. Ironically, it's not one of the requirements under ERISA 404A. Now, when creating an investment policy statement or an IPS, what are the minimum elements that should be included? Does it need to have an executive summary? Yes. Does it need to have an investment policy statement purpose, an IPS purpose? Yes. You should state what is the purpose of having the IPS. Do you need to have a summary, like a plan document summary, kind of like the plan document has a summary plan description? No, you don't need to have a plan document summary. What about asset class guidelines? Yes, this is very important that you have guidelines for the assets that are available to have in the fund or to have in the plan. Does the IPS allow you to have um, real estate funds, for instance? So that's the kind of thing that would be addressed in the IPS. And then a list of active or passive funds. Absolutely not. And this is a really huge point. You don't ever want to list the funds or the investments inside of the IPS because every time you change investments, you would need to change your IPS. Roles and responsibilities. Yes, this would be important. 404C compliance. Yes, 404C is one of the ways in which fiduciaries can discharge or outsource some of their fiduciary duty. 404C basically pushes the liability and the fiduciary risk of selecting investments back to the plan participants. So it's really, really important that the IPS spell out 404C compliance. That's going to protect the company. And then service provider roster. That's not necessary to list the service provider roster. Again, you don't want that kind of specificity. Every time you change service providers, you'd have to update your IPS. Which of the following statements do not accurately describe a prudent process for creating an IPS? Is it, well, we created an IPS for the purpose of creating one to comply with the risk requirements that all employee benefit plans have a specific IPS. Well, that would be not accurately describing an IPS. So we're going to check that because it says do not, which of these statements do not accurately describe the process. The purpose for creating the IPS was to comply with ERISA requirements, but I've already told you that ERISA does not require that you have an IPS. The IPS was created to guide how investments will be offered to the plan participants. That would be a good reason to create an IPS. The IPS defined funds from a very specific provider. No, you don't want that kind of specificity. You don't want to list the provider or the funds that are available in the plan. Ultimately, it was the responsibility of the plan committee to carry out the requirements of and maintain the IPS. That is correct. The IPS should be reviewed regularly, at least every 3 years. I'm going to not mark that because Yes, at least every 3 years. I'd probably say a better practice is annually, but I also know that there's time constraints. I know that many committees have such a full agenda sometimes that it's hard to review the investment policy statement every year. So, I would say annually is a great practice, but at least every 2 to 3 years, the IPS needs to be reviewed, and certainly anytime that there is substantial changes in how we're managing investments for the plan. So, do you have any other questions related to your responsibility with managing investments for the plan, either with creating an IPS or with our responsibility to monitor those investments? Let me know. We can include your questions or comments in a future session of fiduciary training. All right. Hey, you guys stay great. And we're trying to help you be a better fiduciary to serve your plan and to serve your employees.